there is something of which you should be aware. Step back for just a moment from the noise of the earth, the heavy echoing thud of slamming doors, the sharp intake of breath that catches in a throat choked with tears, and the sudden freezing weight that settled in your chest when those words were spoken. Not whispered, not suggested, spoken with the full force of a verdict delivered by people who believed they had the authority to render one. An outsider, who doesn't understand their world. Sit with that for a moment, let it hang in the air between us, the way it hung in the room last night, heavy with implication, sharp with the particular cruelty that only comes from people who know exactly which words will land like stones. They chose that word deliberately, outsider. They rolled it out like a boundary rope, like a velvet cord at the entrance to a place you were never meant to enter, like a hand pressed flat against a door, being pushed firmly shut. They meant it to diminish you. They meant it to remind you of everything you are not. Not of their blood, not of their history, not of their carefully curated idea of what belongs in the frame of their family portrait. From where I sit, looking down through the spun gold tapestry of the stars, through the luminous, shimmering veil that separates the world, you navigate daily from the vast, breathing expanse of heaven, where souls are known not by their titles, or their bank accounts, or the soil they were born upon, but by the pure resonant frequency of their light. From where I sit, the word outsider does not carry the sting they meant it to. Out here, in the language of the cosmos, in the ancient grammar of souls finding one another across the incomprehensible distances of time and incarnation and choice, an outsider is simply a pioneer. It is someone who has traveled from a different constellation of experience, to bring something new, something necessary, something irreplaceable to a closed room that has forgotten what fresh air smells like. But let us look at last night first, because you deserve to have someone look at it with you clearly, without flinching, without the distorting lens of either false comfort or unnecessary harshness. I watched it unfold from the place where I watch everything unfold, not with detachment, but with the particular quality of attention that only becomes possible when you are no longer limited by the tunnel vision that pain creates. And there is a profound, aching beauty in what happened last night that you might have missed entirely, because you were too busy feeling the pain of it, which is understandable, which is human, which is one of the most sacred things about being human. But let me show you what I saw. Your special person cried their heart out last night. Not the polite, restrained, kind of crying that people do when they want to seem moved, without being vulnerable. Not the performative tears of someone playing for an audience. They cried in the way that comes from somewhere deep and structural, the way that happens when something load-bearing inside a person begins to shift, when the internal architecture that has held a certain shape for decades suddenly encounters a force it cannot simply absorb and redistribute. They cried from the fracturing of their loyalty. I want you to understand the physics of that moment from a heavenly perspective, because the physics matter. When a human being cries not from physical pain, but from the fracturing of their loyalty, the tears carry a different weight entirely. There is a specific gravity to them that has no earthly equivalent. They wept because they found themselves standing on a fault line that they had perhaps always known was there, but had managed, until now, to navigate carefully enough that it never fully cracked open beneath them. On one side of that fault line stood the history they were born into. The family, the rigid walls of what they call their world. The expectations that have been stacked like heavy stone blocks for generations, mortared together with guilt and love, and obligation and fear in proportions that are almost impossible to separate from one another. On the other side of that fault line stood you, just you, with your different history, your different language of being, your different constellation of experience. Just you, representing everything that exists outside the box they were raised inside, everything that their families' carefully maintained architecture of identity has no category for, no room for, no tolerance for. Just you, representing the open sky that the bird in the cage has glimpsed through the bars and cannot stop thinking about. When their family spoke that word, outsider, it was not merely a description, it was not an observation, it was a weapon chosen with precision, and it was also beneath the aggression, a confession of fear. It was a boundary line drawn in the dirt with a stick, and it was an ultimatum wrapped inside a slur, and it was a fortress gate swinging shut with the full weight of generational habit behind it. They were trying, in that moment, to build walls high enough to keep you out, to render the territory of their family so inhospitable, so culturally fortified, so densely surrounded by the language of belonging and exclusion, that you would eventually conclude the siege was not worth it and retreat. What they failed to understand, what they perhaps cannot understand from inside the box they inhabit, is that your special person has already spent so much time outside those walls with you, that the fortress has begun to feel like a prison to them. The bars that were once invisible, because they had always been there, because they had grown up breathing the air of that enclosure, and mistaking it for the entire sky, have become visible, and once the bars become visible, the cage is never the same again. The world outside the cage is never the same again either, because you begin to measure every moment inside it against the memory of the open air. They fought for you last night. I need you to understand this with the full weight it deserves, without minimizing it, without explaining it away, without letting the noise of the argument obscure the signal at its center. They did not just argue in a polite, cautious, carefully managed way designed to preserve the peace at the cost of the truth. They waged a war of spirits. Every sob that shook their shoulders was a demolition charge detonating against an old, outdated structure inside themselves, not just against their family's expectations, but against their own internalized version of those expectations. The voice inside them, that speaks with their parents' accent, and carries their grandparents' anxieties, and enforces the unspoken rules that were never written down, because they never needed to be, because everyone inside the walls already knew them without being told. You must be aware of this with great clarity. They did not cry because they doubted you, they did not cry because some part of them secretly agreed with their family's assessment of you, as an outsider who does not belong. They cried because loving you requires them to grow a new kind of strength, a skin thick enough to withstand the arrows of the people who gave them life, who held them when they were small and helpless, who taught them the first language they ever spoke, who are woven into the very fabric of who they believe themselves to be. To stand against those people, even when standing against them is the right and necessary thing, even when it is the only honest thing, is a terrifying and holy alchemy. It is a transformation that does not happen all at once. It happens the way all real transformations happen, in stages, in waves, in moments of courage, followed by moments of collapse, followed by moments of courage again. Now let us speak of this world. They claim you do not understand. because that claim deserves to be examined from multiple angles. And the first angle most people reach for is defense, which is understandable, but not the most useful place to begin. From the earthly vantage point, from inside the story you are living, a family's world can seem enormous. It is made of traditions that go back further than anyone living can fully account for. It is made of unspoken rules that govern everything from how you speak at dinner, to who you are permitted to love, to what constitutes success, and what constitutes failure, and who gets to decide the difference. It may carry with it a certain social standing, a carefully maintained reputation, a way of being seen in whatever community they have built their identity within. It is guarded, and the guarding is taken seriously, because for the people doing the guarding, the world inside those walls is not just a preference, it is their entire reality. It is the only framework they have ever used to organize existence. When they look at you and see a foreign language, they are experiencing something that functions, at the neurological level, very similarly to threat. You are not wrong about the world. You are just operating from a different map entirely, and they have never learned to read yours. But from heaven, dear soul, their world looks like a very small, very beautifully painted box. And I say beautifully painted because I want to be honest. There is real beauty in what they have built. There is love in it, genuine love, even if that love has calcified into control. There is history in it, real history, with weight and texture and meaning. There is pride in it, even if the pride has curdled in places, into something more like defensiveness than genuine dignity. The box is not without its gifts, but it is still a box, and they have lived inside it for so long, that they have forgotten the sky exists outside of it. They have not merely adapted to the box. They have come to believe that the box is the universe, that what exists inside its walls is everything that matters, and what exists outside them is either irrelevant or threatening. When they say you do not understand their world, they are, on one level, correct. But the reason you do not understand it is not the reason they believe. They think you do not understand it, because you are lesser, because you come from somewhere that does not measure up, because your background, or your family, or your culture, or your social position, or whatever specific version of outsiderness they have attached to you is somehow deficient compared to what they have. That is what they mean. But the truth, the actual, luminous, cosmically verifiable truth, is that you do not understand their world because your soul was built for larger horizons. You cannot fold the entirety of your vast, luminous, complicated, searching spirit into the narrow corridors of their family's biases, their inherited limitations, their fear-shaped definitions of who is acceptable and who is not. You were never meant to fit there. The universe did not design you for that particular box. You were designed for something else, something wider, and the fact that you exist at the exact border of their carefully guarded world is not an accident. Nothing in the architecture of the cosmos is an accident. Consider the profound strangeness of the setup for just a moment. Consider the sheer improbability of it. Of all the people in the world, with all the different backgrounds and histories and configurations of being, why would the universe place a love, like yours, right at the boundary of a world so fiercely guarded? Why would two people find each other across whatever distance, geographic, cultural, social, historical, separated them? Why would the connection between you be strong enough to survive the first encounter, to survive the early conversations, to survive the growing knowledge of each other's complexity and contradiction? to survive the first glimpse of what the families on both sides would make of it. It is an ancient law of the cosmos, one that operates whether you are aware of it or not, that light is never sent to places that are already fully illuminated. Light goes to the cracks. Light finds the edges. Light seeks out the places where darkness has grown so accustomed to itself that it has stopped noticing it is dark. You are the outsider, because you are the catalyst. You are not at the border of their world by accident. You were sent there, in whatever language the universe uses to send people to the places where they are most needed and most transformative, to the exact place where your particular quality of light can do the most work. And the work is not comfortable. Let us be entirely honest about that. The work of being a catalyst is not a gentle, aesthetically pleasing process. It is not the kind of spiritual work that looks good on a vision board, or resolves itself in a single night of tears and argument, however significant that night might be in the larger arc of what is being transformed. Being the catalyst means absorbing the reaction. It means standing in the middle of the chemical change that your presence is causing, and not running from it, even when every instinct you have been given for self-preservation tells you that the heat is too much, that the resistance is too great, that perhaps the simpler and less painful path is to withdraw, and find a love that does not require this particular quality of courage. But you know, somewhere below the level of rational thought, below the level of strategy and self-protection, and the careful management of your own emotional exposure, that this is not one of those loves. This is not a love that will let you choose the simpler path, without leaving something essential behind. You know, in the way that the body knows things before the mind has found words for them, that what exists between you and your special person is not something you encountered by chance and could release by choice without consequence. You know that the connection is load-bearing. You know that it holds something up in both of you that would collapse without it. And so you stay, and staying in the face of last night, in the face of the word they chose, and the door they slammed, and the tears that followed, is its own form of radical spiritual practice. Let us talk about what is actually happening inside your special person right now. In the aftermath of last night, because understanding their inner landscape is going to be essential to how you show up for them, in the days and weeks ahead. The aftermath of a battle like last night is a complex and often confusing territory, and they need you to understand its topography, even when they do not have the language to describe it to you directly. They are exhausted in a way that sleep will not entirely fix. The exhaustion of emotional warfare goes deeper than the physical body, deeper than the nervous system, down into something that might be called the soul's fatigue, the particular tiredness that comes from having had to be fully present, and fully defended, and fully exposed all at the same time, from having had to argue for something as intimate and essential as their own right, love the person they have chosen. They are sore in places that do not have names. They are also, beneath the exhaustion, something else, something quieter and more interesting. They are changed, not completely, not irreversibly, not yet, or at least, not in the sense that change can be seen and measured from the outside, in a single morning, but something shifted in them last night, in the same way that something shifts in a landscape after a significant geological event. The surface still looks more or less the same, the roads are still there, the trees are still standing, but beneath the surface, the plates have moved, and everything that sits on top of them is now resting on a slightly different foundation than it was before. They stood last night, perhaps imperfectly, perhaps with more grief than defiance, perhaps with more tears than fire, but they stood, and the standing has changed the internal map of who they are, and what they are capable of in ways that will continue to reveal themselves for a long time after this. The guilt will come in waves. This is important for you to know, not because you need to manage it or solve it, but because you need to recognize it when it arrives, and not mistake it for doubt about you. The guilt of someone who is in the process of separating their loyalty from the expectations of the family they were born into, is one of the most disorienting and destabilizing forms of guilt that exists. It does not feel like the guilt of having done something wrong. It feels, from the inside, almost indistinguishable from the guilt of having done something wrong, which is what makes it so difficult to navigate. They have not betrayed anyone. They have not abandoned anyone. They have simply begun the process of choosing themselves, of choosing a love that was not pre-approved by the people who raised them, and in the world they were raised in. That can feel like the deepest possible form of betrayal, when those waves of guilt come, and they will come, in the middle of ordinary moments, while doing the dishes or driving to work, or lying in the dark waiting for sleep. They will sometimes turn toward you in ways that are confusing, and perhaps even hurtful. They may become briefly distant, pulling inward in a way that feels like withdrawal. They may overcorrect, pushing you away slightly in a reflex of self-protection that has nothing to do with how they actually feel about you, and everything to do with the internal negotiation they are conducting with the version of themselves that was shaped by the people who called you an outsider. They may occasionally become short-tempered or sad in ways that seem disproportionate to the immediate circumstances, because they are not responding only to the immediate circumstances, they are also responding to the enormous, invisible weight of everything that has been stirred up and cannot simply be set back down. None of this is a sign that you should retreat. None of it is confirmation that their family was right about you. All of it is evidence that a human being in the middle of a profound and necessary transformation is doing the difficult, unglamorous work of actually transforming, which rarely looks as clean or as linear as we would like it to look. What you can offer them during this time, the single most important thing you can offer them, is a quality of presence that does not require them to perform their recovery for you. They do not need you to need them to be fine. They do not need to reassure you that they do not regret their choice. They do not need to manage your anxiety about the situation on top of managing their own. What they need is to feel that you are there, steady and warm and spacious, without an agenda attached to your steadiness. They need to feel that when the guilt pulls them inward, you will not interpret that as a verdict on your relationship. They need to feel that you have enough internal ground beneath your own feet, that you can wait for them, that you are not so destabilized by the unpredictability of their process, that you add your own needs for reassurance to the pile of things they are already carrying. This is harder than it sounds. Everything about last night will have stirred something in your own depths, your own histories of rejection and belonging, your own tender places. Around the question of whether you are enough, whether you are worthy, whether the people who look at you and see an outsider might be seeing something real. When someone delivers the verdict that you do not belong, it does not simply land on the surface and bounce off. It sinks in through the old wounds, through the cracks in the armor that were already there before last night, and finds the places inside you, where some part of you has always been uncertain about your own belonging. Every human being has those places, and last night, their family found yours and pressed on them deliberately. So you will also need to do some tending to yourself, in the aftermath of this, not in a way that centers your experience over theirs right now. They are the one who had to stand in a room with their family and defend you, and that particular quality of exposure deserves to be held with care and priority. But in a quiet, private way, you will need to return to the knowledge of your own worth, not the performed confidence that looks outward and dares anyone to challenge it, but the quieter, more durable, knowing that comes from being honest with yourself about who you actually are, what you actually bring, how you actually move through the world when you are most fully yourself. Return to that, sit with it, let it be the ground you stand on when the echo of their word tries to make itself heard inside you. The anger is not about you. This is a truth you need to carry close, because there will be moments when it will feel very specifically about you. When the precision of their attack will feel too targeted to be anything other than personal, but anger that comes from a family, watching one of their own begin to step outside the walls they have built, is not primarily about the person on the other side of the wall. It is about loss of control. It is about the terror of watching someone you have loved and shaped and invested in, and perhaps sacrificed, for begin to orient themselves around a gravity other than the family's gravity. You have become in their eyes the competing gravity, the force that is pulling their person in a direction they did not sanction and cannot fully control. And the only tool they have for pushing back against a force they cannot control is the language of exclusion. Outsider. Someone who doesn't understand our world. Someone who doesn't belong here. What they are not saying, because they do not have the self-awareness or the language for it, is, we are afraid. We are afraid of losing them. We are afraid of the world they might choose if they choose you. We are afraid that our world, the box we have lived in, the structure we have built our entire identity around, might not be as sufficient or as complete or as right as we have always needed to believe it was. Your presence, simply by existing, asks a question they have not prepared an answer for. It asks, what if there is another way to be? And the families that react the way yours did last night are the families that find that question the most threatening, because they have the most invested in there being only one answer. The tears that fell last night were a cleansing. I want you to sit with that framing for a moment, because it runs counter to the instinct to see them as evidence of damage, as proof that something has been broken that cannot be repaired. Tears of the kind your special person shed last night are what happens when soil that has grown too hard is finally receiving the rain it needed. The hardness was not their fault. It is what happens to any living thing that has been expected to hold a shape that was not its natural shape for long enough. The form sets, the surface crusts over, and underneath the crust, beneath the performance of being the person the family needed them to be, something has been waiting, patient and persistent, for the conditions that would allow it to soften and breathe, and reach toward the light. You are those conditions. Your love is the rain. The tears were not defeat, they were the beginning of something becoming possible, that has not been possible before. And now comes the longer game. Because what happened last night was significant, But it was also just one night in what may be a long and complicated and non-linear process of renegotiation. Not just between your special person and their family, but between your special person and the version of themselves that was built inside that family's world. That version of themselves is real, and it is not simply discarded by one night of tears and argument. It is the version that learned how to love inside a particular set of rules, how to belong inside a particular set of walls, how to be safe inside a particular structure, even when that structure was also, in ways they may not yet be fully conscious of, constraining them. You cannot rush this process. The shedding of an old world is a slow, agonizing skin change, and it happens on its own schedule, not on the schedule that your impatience, or your anxiety, or your very understandable desire for resolution might prefer. They will have moments where the weight of the guilt, the grief of the rupture, the sheer exhaustion of standing against the gravity of everything they were raised inside, becomes temporarily overwhelming, and they will reach for the familiarity of the old world in ways that may confuse or frighten you. They may soften toward their family when you expected them to maintain the boundary. They may seek peace through accommodation in moments when you thought the line had been drawn. They may seem in those moments to take a step backward from everything they demonstrated last night. This is not betrayal. This is not weakness. This is the completely natural rhythm of someone who is not leaving a bad relationship, but transforming a complex one, someone who loves the people who hurt them, who does not want to choose between the love they were born into and the love they have chosen, who is slowly and painfully learning that when those two things are placed in direct opposition, by the people doing the opposing, the choice is being forced upon them, but that knowledge does not arrive all at once, and it does not arrive cleanly. Your job in those moments is not to press, not to catalog the inconsistencies, or hold them to the standard they set last night, or remind them of the line they drew. Your job is to be the place they can return to that remains consistent, consistently warm, consistently honest, consistently present, so that when the wave of guilt or grief or nostalgia for the old world passes, which it will, they can find their footing again and know exactly where you stand and what the love between you offers, that the world they are slowly stepping away from cannot. You do not need to fight their family. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all the things I need you to hear. Because the instinct, when someone attacks the person you love, when they use their influence and their history and their authority to diminish and exclude, is to meet that attack with force, to defend yourself, to build a case, to compile evidence of your worth, and present it to people who have decided in advance not to accept it. But the families who draw these lines in the dirt are not persuaded by evidence. They are persuaded, if they are persuaded at all, only by time and by the sustained reality of what they observe. The fact that the love between you is not a phase, not a rebellion, not a passing experiment in outsiderness, but an actual, durable, life-building thing that their person chooses again and again, including on the mornings after the hardest nights. The best argument you can make to their family is not made with words. It is made by being, over time, exactly who you are, not a diminished apologetic, edges sanded off version of yourself that is trying to pass as an insider, but the full, authentic, luminous version of yourself that your special person fell in love with. The moment you begin to shrink yourself to fit their definitions, to perform their version of acceptable, to earn their approval by becoming less of yourself, you lose the very thing that made your special person look up from the only world they had ever known and see the sky for the first time. The sky was always there. You helped them see it. Keep being the sky. There is a question the universe is placing in front of you right now. Not loudly, not urgently, but with the patient persistence of something that will keep returning until it has been honestly engaged with. The question is not how do I make them accept me. The question is not how do I win this. The question is not even how do I help my special person choose me. The question the universe is asking, in its quiet and inexorable way, is this: are you brave enough to hold the hand of someone who is in the process of walking out of the only world they have ever known, knowing that the walk will be slow and unsteady, and sometimes interrupted, and never quite finished, knowing that there will be days when the weight of what they are leaving makes them lean so heavily on you that you will need to find reserves of steadiness you did not know you had, knowing that the gratitude for your presence may not always be visible, because it is buried under the grief of the leaving, knowing that none of this has a clean ending and a clear resolution, but only a gradual, continuous deepening. Are you brave enough for that? Because that is what is being asked of you, not perfection, not imperviousness, not the ability to be unaffected by the word they chose last night, or the door that slammed, or the weight that settled in your chest. You are allowed to feel all of that. You are allowed to grieve the absence of a welcome that should have been offered, and was withheld. You are allowed to sit with the injustice of being seen as less than you are by people who do not know you, and have decided in advance not to try. You are allowed all of that. But beneath the feeling, beneath the grief and the anger, and the exhaustion, and the old wounds that last night pressed on, there is something else. There is the knowing that what you and your special person have built between you is real, and worth it, and already, even now, in the morning after the hardest night, something that neither of you would choose to unmake. Hold that knowing. Let it be the ground beneath the ground. Let it be what you return to when the surface is unsteady. Let it be the thing you offer your special person when they come to you, with the red rims of their eyes, and the exhaustion in their posture, and the quiet, shaken determination that has settled into the corners of their mouth. The determination of someone who has paid a real price for a real love, and found, in the paying, that they do not regret it. You are being watched over, dear soul. From the place where I watch, from through the luminous patient architecture of the stars, that have seen every version of this story that has ever been lived, I want you to know that the blueprint of this love is grander than one night's bitter argument, grander than one family's fear-driven verdict, grander than the single word they chose to draw their line in the dirt. You and your special person are writing something together that has its own integrity, its own weight, its own arc. The noise of their small world will be loud for a while. It will intrude and press and make itself heard. But small worlds have small gravitational fields, and what you are building together, in the open air beyond their walls, is drawing its gravity from somewhere much larger. Breathe in the peace of the higher realms. Let the noise fade. You know what is true, so do they, and the love that knows what is true does not require anyone else's permission to be real.